We have been listening and arguing about the perspective differences and assumptive reflections on the truths of the atheistic and theistic people since the birth of the linguistic thoughts. Thousands of arguments and timeless assertion of contradictions, but still we are at the origin of our differences. It leaves us with the basic problem of assumption of the unknown, and still we are into numerous inconclusive debates. This is an essay by Rajan B. Acharya, God, Vulgaris, NUS, Exquisitus. Well, whatever you have been exploiting or absorbing, whatever you wrap into your imagination, or whatsoever unknown is it to pop into your plots, are just within an interknitted wholesome havoc, spread as an asymmetrical objective of just three fundamental particles or FPs, the electrons along with gluon bound down and up quarks. Those make up protons and neutrons. That's the perfect root of whatsoever that exists as a matter. Also, it can expand into unreasonably over finite consequences, and that's including you. But are these tri-particles the euphoric mammoths of everything? I remind you that I am only talking about those weaver FPs who weave the wholesome matters. Yet besides those three FPs, there are ranges of known and unknown FPs, and they don't matter at all to our wholesomeness. Now if you sneak beyond those expressed in conceptual logical geometries overlapping your observatory, then you can explain me the root theory of being either an atheist or a theist, or an agnostic referencing your argument on the existence of those external FPs. Those never matter to us. Can a neuron comprising electrons, up-down quarks, explain the need of existence of heavier FPs, the top quarks or W bosons? Why should it ever be produced as the nonsense matters, not our items to fly beyond us? Your consciousness will die out, I know that, and I also know that your neural chain will dissolve. But the FPs remain the same as they were before. So what created the FPs? Those you inherited and left in turns, and with whom you neither had any conscious deal to let them pack you as you, nor had thoughts as to how to make myself out of these particles, etc. This rejecting God without a point, with ignorance, not so reasonable, is your foolish fault. Will you explain the production as God, nature made it so, or maybe something made it, yet that's not God, but something we can't or haven't understood? And if it's so, that's okay. But if you're stuck on these phrases as an absorbent God that will pull you into its own regions, then just think. Nature, as you must know, is a collection of FPs whose production relies on your non-understandable something, and in turn that non-understandable something is an alternative or synonym for God. On the other conscience, Though you, the opportunistic people, relatively agree the unknowability of God, we keep on inventing root points, generate exploiting codes and socio-political functions, all itself to express incompatible geoeconomic impressions, counter applying and associating those concepts to the unknowability is an irony stretched in fragile assurances of imagination, which imposes errors of psychological assumptions. Let it be. If you want to conserve it as an unknowable God, then it mustn't rise in your mind, which has been nourished on geographical fundamentals and further blended with socially constricted thought experiments. Also, everything you conceptualized of it comes from your dismissive neurons, thus can't be trusted because of their psychological vulnerability and limitations. Based on the fact that the unknown FP spreads beyond its neurological sources. Thus, the unknowable conclusion of God throws us back to non-understandable something, aka NUS. Now let us come to the basics. Who made an electron? What was you once when you had life? And what still is and exists is you or a freed particle even after your death. If the NUS had made that electron, then it must be beyond your assumed and applied consciousness, because it is not a thing which exists as a product of or from your mind. It may have torn out from the remains of an external heavier FP which once had decayed. The external FP can be approved is the product of NUS based on its tortury aspect. Now if NUS is God, then it can't be a human affairs correspondent, as it's not his job to bother about anything that's created out of its non-material self. Can you explain why the God pokes the particular minds from one of the bioplanets out of the existing thousands of bioplanets, assumed with a subjective conclusion of one bioplanet per galaxy, and further slicing it to 0.00001% out of minimum 100 billion galaxies? Can we argue on why the God ever exists on the basis of why did NUS ever exist, or vice versa? Well, both of the theories have a common answer, because it had to for reason or stability, or because no any something can limit itself down to absolute zero. Thus there is always thermal expansion of that something which grew everything. That's a validating point. But is that God? An atheist repeats, no, it's NUS, not God. And the NUS's existence is just an existence that has no reason besides its non-interfering continuity. And if I say or ask to a theist, then he will reply, no, it's God, whose existence is just an existence that has no reason besides its interfering continuity. God is or not, and whatever NUS it is or not is always there is something. Thus by default you are either an atheist or theist, and also by default you either believe in God or NUS, and also by default you believe in something that can either be God or NUS. If you ever cancel either God or NUS as false subject, then it will cancel the whole existence of something, which is by default an error, because it cancels your own existence. Thus, by default conclusion, you can't cancel or disapprove either God or NUS, and also can't take stance of error on either one of them. You can only choose between the words to address it. This thus concludes that something equals to God, something equals to NUS. Therefore, God is NUS, is something equals to God equals to NUS. Whatever you believe is that the something which is interchangeable concept can be developed into many flavors of wide and constructive gods, is for your conveniences or can be left as it is, just to be the original NUS. Thus, you are either an atheistic theist or theistic atheist, based on the fact of fundamental association with NUS or God, and are obviously obliged to accept them as objective flavors of your belief, because it is the limit of all the infinite dimensions that ever can be argued upon.